Welcome to Session 2 of our Resurrection versus Religion Life Group Bible Study. We continue to explore Luke's Gospel and Jesus' teachings as we think about the way of a disciple. We'll start this week with two more interactions between Jesus and some religious officials. It is pretty much a continuation of your last week's reading. Please invite someone from your group to read Luke chapter 20, verses 20 to 40. Read that aloud after you've paused the video, and then come right back and we'll talk about it. The division in this passage is pretty natural. There are two specific interactions with some similarities. Both include questions for Jesus about political and religious controversies of his day. Both are fraught with opportunities for Jesus to mess up, and both seem to be setups in which to trap Jesus for some very real punishment, either by religious authorities or by the Roman authorities themselves. I don't want you to think that this is like getting the wrong answer on Family Feud, where you just don't win any money. No. There were serious implications for Jesus, up to and including punishment by death, which we know came later. This first scene, verses 20 to 26, has to do with taxes. We know about taxes too. There was a controversy over the people of God living in the city of God and having to pay taxes to Caesar, who was considered a god by many. The Roman system, though, was built on this go along to get along idea. If you just didn't stir up trouble and paid your taxes, you could keep on living your lives and even enjoy the benefits of the Roman Empire, which often meant an increase in the standard of living and property values and those sorts of things. But you had to pay your taxes, and they were significant. Those taxes also funded what was called the cult of the emperor. These folks worshipped the emperor in a kind of a nationalistic religion. This was hard for a lot of faithful Jewish people who wouldn't even consider eating food sacrificed to idols other than the one true God. You remember from Sunday the image and likeness on the coin that we showed, the image of Caesar and the words Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus. For us, think about this. Think about living in a community where we were allowed to practice Christianity, but perhaps had to make that required annual Islamic offering of zakat. That's usually about 2.5% of the total value of all your possessions. That's something that Muslim people do. Just imagine that you had to do that too, simply because of where you lived. Those monies would go to the local mosque, and then you could continue being Christian. You just go along to get along, right? We know how this works, but it just doesn't feel right to have to do it. This is the environment in which Jesus is trying to answer a question about Roman taxes. Jesus would have been entirely within Hebrew biblical bounds to call for all faithful Jews to stop paying Roman taxes or else be found guilty of idolatry. He could also have called the people to revolt against the Romans. That would have made a lot of people happy, actually. He could have found some scriptures to justify a continued go-along to get along attitude. You can easily find that in the scriptures. We can easily find that still today. But he didn't do either one of those things. He looked at that coin and said, that's the emperor's money. If you plan to use the emperor's money, you'd better be prepared to play the game and pay the taxes. It's even got his image on it. But as for you, God's people, you remember what has God's image on it, and you give to God that which is God's. On Sunday, we talked about Genesis 1:26, the creation story. Humankind bears the image and likeness of God. Humankind belongs to God. What does it mean to give ourselves to God in the way Jesus describes? I think most scholars would agree that Jesus is reminding us that our highest loyalty and deepest faithfulness belong to God. Practically speaking, we live in a world that is just as complicated as the first century. We pay taxes that go to all sorts of things. Some of it is good, some of it is wasted, and some of it we might even call bad. but it is the price we pay to participate in the economic system in the country in which we live. Jesus says we should be way more concerned with that which bears God's image, which is our humanity. So I want to ask you this. What do you think it means to give our humanness, our humanity, to God? To give to God ourselves, our identity, our very existence. What does that mean? Give to God that which is God's. What does it mean to give God your complete and entire self? Put some practical thoughts on the table as you talk about this. How do we do this? How do we give to God that which is God's every single day? Take about 10 minutes and have some good conversation and come right back. Well, the next part of our conversation should be easier than that, right? Maybe not. On Sunday, I delved quite deeply into the context of the question about this question. The Sadducees, who don't even believe in resurrection, have an absurd question about the resurrection. Can you imagine that? They're just trying to prove the absurdity of the idea of resurrection in the asking of their question. Of course, Jesus is going to get in trouble, no matter what he says. They pull this obscure Levirate marriage law out of Deuteronomy 25:5, where you have to take care of the wife of your brother if he dies. Father children by that wife, as well as your own wife, carry on his legacy in that way and become responsible for what would have been his family, even if he hadn't yet had a family. In Luke 20, this process plays out in a strange way. Not 7 brides for 7 brothers, but 1 bride for 7 brothers. Everybody dies in the story, and the Sadducees want to know, well, who's she going to be married to in the resurrection, or in heaven, is something we might say. Jesus doesn't laugh off their question, which I think would have been my response. He teaches them. He reframes their question, affirming the resurrection as a very real thing, affirming the promise of God as God of the living, not God of the dead, and then pushing these folks to recognize that God's new creation is not going to be concerned about some of these very human institutions, such as marriage. There will be a much deeper kind of an intimacy with God and with each other that surpasses anything we could have ever imagined. Now, I recognize we could spend hours unpacking exactly what Jesus says about this specific controversy, but I am more interested in what Jesus is doing in telling this story and having this experience. Jesus is reframing a controversy in the proper light of God's resurrection life and God's new creation. Teaching and learning happen as he does this. Deeper thinking happens as he does this. And transformation happens as he does this. So I wonder if we might share together in our groups, when have you encountered some serious controversy and had Jesus reframe it for you in the light of God's new creation unfolding in the world? Maybe someone in the group has a story to tell. Talk about that for a bit. But know that this reframing doesn't always resolve the controversy. That's not what we're getting at. It simply puts it in the right context, usually with a clearer understanding of what is most important in the eyes of God. Okay, work on that for about 10 minutes, and then your facilitator will lead you into the big questions. I'll see you next week. Thank you very much.